All right, so I'm live again. Matthew Gates, IPM specialist. I'm talking to you today about two main. Oh, it's going to be annoying with the vibrations. We'll see if this works out. Um, we will be talking, or I will be talking with Aaron the grower, and we're having people come in. He's requesting already to be on live. He is definitely going to. We're going to go. And he's here.
Howdy.
Yes. Howdy. Yeah, what's up?
Oh, just living the dream of having a baby and trying to maintain an entire farm,
Oh, so the American dream,
I
kind
suppose.
of.
That's what
Kind
they
of.
tell
I
me.
mean, depending on what time period and who's saying it, right?
It's the
But
traditional American dream.
I would say, yeah, or maybe the idealized traditional American dream, right?
Even more accurate. Yep.
Maybe, yeah. So, anyways, well, that's cool. I have high respect for people who maintain farmland and Um, well, actually, that's not always the case. Sometimes people don't maintain it very well, and I don't have so much respect for them. But the people who do actually do the maintaining, I think
There,
that's very cool.
it's never been a more suiting term. There are levels to this shit.
Hmm. Right. And
So
well, so should we talk about? Well, I'll let you introduce it. You're the one who actually made the agenda for this session.
I just, I try to take as much off your plate as possible, and I appreciate your time. So, um, what I'd like to talk to you today about is thrips, primarily. I think at the end of
Hmm.
this, I'd like to go over Aphidius and banker plants for Aphidius and stuff like that. I got a lot of cool information from a really incredible insectary and entomologist there, and not to discredit any information you would have. This is more of like
No.
a collaboration of incredible entomologists.
I appreciate that. No, I mean, there's always great the people who are doing the like in the trenches, like actual research is super important. And I'm happy that you were able to have this conversation. I guess we only have an hour, so I'll get right started talking about the thrips. Now, I have I'll just preface this all by saying that I love to talk about, for those who don't know, I know you know, Aaron, I love to talk about things like where did this come from? Why did these pests develop this way? Because it gives us information. First of all, we have technology and research that allows us to even answer that question, which is amazing to me. Um, and then in addition to that, what can we gain from having that knowledge? And that's that we can understand their physiology, we can understand their life cycle, their predators, their pathogens, and we can incorporate those in a more holistic IPM manner. And that's the
Absolutely.
thing.
And to put that to just to kind of add on to what you're saying and to put it on the ground floor, I think a lot of people have experience with something in their life. Maybe it's not thrips, maybe it's like lobstering or something, and maybe they can take some of this information that we provide and kind of, or mostly you provide, and kind of like layer it on top of what they know. And that's how you kind of create a grower, is by allowing them to develop in their own right, but giving them the resources to do so. And I think that's what you do so well. And that's why Thrips is on the plate today, because I'll tell you what, 2 weeks ago, maybe it's 2.5 weeks ago now, I had so many thrips on my plants. And you know
Hmm.
me, I'm like the most uptight IPM grower that I know. I'm on top of everything, man. Like sprays and biologicals, whatever it might be, I'm on top of it. And I came out to my garden, and a day or two before that, I had seen a bunch of newly laden pollen all over the plants. And I came out a couple days later, and there were just tens of thousands of thrips on my plants.
What kind of
And
plant?
what's that?
What kind of plants?
So I have 22 different cultivars in that bed. So it's all cannabis.
Oh, all cannabis though. Okay.
Yeah. Um, and I'll tell you what, they weren't really discerning between varieties. It was more of like a wherever the pollen had laid the heaviest. And I'll tell you this, let me start by saying I'm sort of embarrassed because like I just went and watched your older Thrip videos from like 17 and 18. And you totally called this like a mile away that thrips eat pollen.
Sure.
And that you pointed out that one study from 2005 where they really thrived with pine pollen. And
Yeah, silver pine, I think.
okay, so I kind of should have made the assumption that pollen may only help the thrips, and so it did. The thrips followed the pollen to my plants, and I was like, oh, there's thrips everywhere. I don't see any damage though, and I just observed them, and I saw them going from pollen grain to pollen grain, just eating. And they're so fast and reactive. When I would go anywhere near them, they would fly up under the leaf, and I tried to keep track of them, but they had pollen on them, and they were consuming pollen. And so the assumption, the hypothesis that I'm making is that they follow that pollen, and they follow it to wherever that pollen is going to be, which is probably the next food source, right? Because pollen goes from one plant to another. So the thrips are following this, looking for a new food source, and they found it in my cannabis plants. So of course, the morning after I got the thrips, I sprayed with neem oil, pyrethrins and BT mix. And I didn't see any more thrips right away. Actually, I saw one or two here and there, but I did see damage. So they had, in that 24-hour period, laid waste to the edible pollen and started consuming my plants.
I see. I just wanted to mention this really quickly that at least on my end, it seems like you might be having a bit of a lag or sort of like a accordion effect. Have you ever seen that where like you didn't slow down though, so it's kind of a weird accordion where like it would go from regular to like super quick in the audio.
Okay,
But
what'd you make?
95% of it I got, but I didn't hear the sentence where you said they were eating. You put out neem and then something else. I think was a biocontrol agent.
Oh, neem with pyrethrin and BT.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay.
Um, so I did knock them back with that one application, but I noticed a whole lot of damage, like a whole lot of little holes, the thrip damage,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just jumped on a really serious thrip IPM protocol, which I can go over with you, but it's pretty much the same as my aphid protocol because, in terms of sprays, it's the same because
Mm-hmm.
I only have so many knockdown sprays at my availability. And then
Sure.
when it comes to BCAs, is where things start to get interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
real quick, I'll run through because I think people want to know like what sprays can you use. And again, you really need to check your area. Matt's mentioned this before, but you can't just go
Yeah.
spraying pyrethrins and spinosad in a lot of places.
Yeah. I just want to make that caveat here. Oh, that's a seam. I see. I just want to make that caveat here that like it's almost impossible to make broad, generalizations about what you can and cannot use. Especially like centuply, 100 times in cannabis. Like
Oh,
it's changing all the time, especially in the USA, but abroad as well.
we're
Um,
going to talk about that. I would like to talk to you about Aureus, and it's interesting. Aureus insidiosus, or the minute pirate bug, is highly, highly less effective when you buy it from an insectary than when you can, integrate indigenous Aureus. Okay, we'll go over
and
that later.
oh, I'm curious about that. I'm not that I'm curious. That makes total sense to me. What I
Yeah,
mean to say is that I think it'll be a great topic.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'd love to talk about that more. And I'm curious, you probably didn't ask the question, but did you ask, or are you aware, like, what, um, what entails indigenousness? Like, that's a question for
For
that's a
me,
question
I'll tell
that's
you
very
what. For
political
me, it's
too.
pretty
But
simple. Do they show up on their own?
oh, okay, okay. So like
But
even like a few generations potentially.
yeah, sure, yeah, absolutely. To me, but all of my information is anecdotal. Everything I've learned through observation. And I didn't go to school for entomology. I didn't go to school for botany. I went to school for psychology. So a lot of this stuff is sort of like um, is something I've always wanted to do. Okay, I
A
really
lot of
hold
the
on.
research isn't what?
Go ahead.
Oh, I would say a lot of the research is sometimes it's esoteric and arcane, but a lot of it's intuitively understandable, I think, for a lot of people. Like put biocontrol in place with a lot of thrips, figured out how many it ate in a certain amount of time, extrapolate. Yeah, like that kind of stuff makes a lot of sense. Some of the stuff that's a little bit more hard to kind of tease out is where the research from the entomologist is super helpful once we make those observations, right?
Right.
Um,
They're hands on with with this stuff. It talk about frontline scientists.
seriously. And
Yeah.
they're not, and much like a lot of people in the front lines, they're not always well supported,
Yeah.
either by other people or by the people who are supposed to be supporting them, um, financially or otherwise.
Right. And they don't always charge a lot for their services.
That's true.
So I try and support them any way I can. I want to come together with them to provide the community with the transcription. I actually had this they BioBest is a great company. I'll go ahead and name drop them because they've done right by me every step of the way. They've been so busy with the COVID struggle. Everybody's gardening now, so everybody's getting into BCAs, and they've been so inundated with orders that they haven't been able to get me the transcription of our video chat that I've been requesting. But that's coming, and I'd like to share that with the community when it comes. But so what were we talking? What was I going to say before this about the thrips? I want to talk about. We might as well just jump. You want to do BioBest first?
Yeah, why don't we do BioBest first?
Okay, cool. It seems like it's sort of like the hot topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ophidius banker plants, and there's a little bit of research out there, not much, but a little bit on these rye, barley, or wheat plants acting as banker plants for cereal aphids. So an aphid that will not attack your cannabis plant, but that will be a food supply for your Ophidius while your aphids are gone.
So, in other words, so for people who aren't familiar with this, the idea is that you colonize these plants with the aphids, the cereal aphids, and then they reproduce, but they are specialists, so they don't feed on the cannabis plant, which is great. But the Ophidius can parasitize them, they can parasitize other aphids in the area, and they can parasitize aphids that feed on cannabis, like the cannabis aphid. Um, but there's a problem with that, right?
Yes. BioBest said, okay, so I'm literally going to read from my notes because this stuff is so important to get right. It's really highly unlikely that the parasitoid wasps will be able to knock back a serious number of aphids. So they're just
And
out that
did they explain why?
because when you're using a banker system, it takes a long time to get a large colony. They kind of have to work up, and she says, and I can't remember what her words were exactly, but basically they will be highly outnumbered. You have to dump so many Ophidius on your plants to be effective against aphids that the banker systems won't be very effective by themselves.
And intuitively, this makes a certain sort of sense, I think, because for those who don't know, I mean, there are some parasitoid wasps that, and I keep saying the word parasitoid, I want to explain that really quickly. Something that's a parasite typically does not directly lead to the death of its host. Sometimes it happens because multiple exist on the host or a bunch of other reasons, and it's hard to describe everything so broadly. But a parasitoid, oid means like or similar to a lot of the times. So a parasitoid is like a parasite, except that it does kill its host as a normal part of its life cycle. And there are some
Right.
wasps that when they lay their eggs in like a caterpillar, they're polyembryonous, which means that they one egg can have multiple embryos and produce like hundreds of
Wow.
larvae. Yeah. This doesn't happen very often. And as far as I know, at least as far as we know, I think might be more accurate to say. But with Aphidius, it's one for one, as far as I understand it to be. So you would need a ton of
Yes.
Aphidius.
And that's kind of
Or
what they were
ton.
saying is the only effective Aphidius applications are dumps. They're just saying buy a lot and dump them on once a week.
So in the biocontrol world, we have two ways of describing this. We have inundative releases, which are what you're referring to, and inoculative releases, which are smaller releases that are meant to sort of be a beachhead for the colony to increase rapidly or slowly, depending on the situation at hand. And so they're saying that you basically have to apply tons of Aphidius because it's a one for one kill, more or less. Like there's another parasitic wasp I'm very familiar with using called Diglyphus izei, and it feeds on the American serpentine leaf miner, Liriomyza trifolii.
That makes
And
sense. Okay.
the the females, they will host feed and they will sting the larvae and lay their eggs next to it, and the egg hatches and the larva uh, attaches itself as an ectoparasite, so it lives on the outside of the larva, and they will feed and parasitize the larvae, and then they will pupate, and they'll use their own minds. Um, in fact, they'll I think I can't remember if they actually controlled the larva to actually make these 6 fecal pillars, which sounds funny, but yeah, they make these pillars to keep the leaf up so the pupa can survive and eclose and hatch out. And but the females host feed, and they host feed quite a bit. So you're getting kind of two things there, but with Aphidius, you're not. There's no host feeding.
Right. It's very like one dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, that would be the first reason to go to not use a banker system. Secondarily, they claim that it may not even prevent aphids from coming to your plant because the aphids kind of know that. The aphids are like, there's a bear over there, but if we stay over here, we're fine.
One of the biggest influences on behavior of animals, and I guess plants too, if you want to extend it to that, I think. But and for pests in particular, what we're talking about, herbivores, is predator pressure. Like there are plenty of studies, like spider mite, like larvae. Do they? I forget. Do they pupate? I guess some do. Some do, and some
Yeah,
have like
both.
weird.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they definitely pupate, right? So
yeah.
they have like a pre-pupal, pupal, and then calypstosis, which is the name of my, shout out to me. I have a small
Shout out to me.
SoundCloud where I make experimental music, and that's the album name is calypstosis, which is
I didn't know you
the,
did that. That's so cool. I have to check out your music.
definitely it's nothing you would bump at the club. It's very experimental and ambient and
You
not
wouldn't find
altogether
me at the
great.
club anyway. That's okay.
Well, good. But I really found it was interesting because it was like a well, I won't get into it too much. If you're interested, check it out on SoundCloud. It's Sync Angel, just like my
It's
Instagram. But
it's too bad we only have an hour. Otherwise, we would really be,
I know, right? I know. That's why you're going to be on the Growing with My Fellow Growers podcast as well at 3:30 PST or
uh, 4.
4
I'm very excited
p.m.
about that, man. And I appreciate, you getting me in touch with those guys. So it'll be a lot of fun.
They're a great group of people, and I think they would really enjoy this topic. So, but anyways, the point I was trying to make was that um, uh, larval mites that were exposed to just the presence of predators. So they can perceive that through
Yes.
uh, sense of smell, essentially, or chemoreception, or visually, although mite eyes are pretty bad. But mites, insects, all kinds of organisms, they get this pressure, and the adults as well. If they detect this presence, they're going to be like, well, I don't want to lay my eggs here. Thrips are the same way, and predatory mites are too. For those who don't know, Western flower thrips are omnivorous, and they will feed on predatory mite eggs. And it again, evolutionarily, it's very advantageous to feed on your enemy's eggs,
Right.
right? So
It's multi-leveled attack there.
exactly, right. And so when some certain predatory mites like Amblyssia swirsky and Neocetus cucumeris, when they detect that presence of thrips, uh, they might have been ovipositing near pollen sources because for some of those mites, these two in particular, they feed on pollen too. And it's a great ready food source, proteinaceous. They're much more fecund on even just a solely pollen diet. But like the thrips are also big fans of pollen, like you were saying, and so they'll feed on the eggs as well. And so they will change their egg laying tactics because of that. And so these are like the little subtle details that people
Oh,
don't go into.
yes. That is important.
Hmm. But anyways, with aphids, it's like the same kind of thing where aphids have co-evolved on their plant and also with their predators and parasitoids and parasites and pathogens for a long, 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 long time.
Yep.
And it's they have it's like a colony organism. Some aphids are considered colony organisms, sort of subsocial or eusocial.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's like this. If you look at it like genes, if you look at it like the gene is the important thing that needs to be replicated, if we distill it down to that, then it makes evolutionary sense that species of aphids that are clonally reproducing, um, then they'll have a bunch of sisters. So if one sister dies, like if a parasitoid latches on to an aphid who gets close and the aphid produces from its little tailpipes, the cornicles or sifuncles, if it produces like a sticky substance for defense and it glues that aphid and kills that female, then the colony will be advantaged by that. So one death of a clone, no problem, right? And so that kind of sacrificial behavior,
Huh.
that altruistic behavior that we see in ants and wasps and bees and that sort of a thing, which, by the way, most of which aren't hive colony organisms. Most of those are solitary. The development of sociality is actually kind of rare. Um, but like you see how that is helpful, right? So it doesn't really matter if you can produce 100 in your lifetime and two die, but it saves the colony. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, you would produce a whole front line just to take the brunt of the force and not think anything of it. Must
Definitely. And so,
must be great to not have this prefrontal cortex and have all this ability to think about death.
right, yeah, exactly. There are some evolutionary constraints to that development. And
So,
you study psychology, so in a lot of ways, I feel like that's kind of like studying um, how would I put it? Like an important evolutionary development in animals in general, right? Consciousness and psychology and behavior and how that even has its own influences, obviously.
it's influenced the way that we study these things, at least.
And it's influenced like how we as animal organisms operate, right? And so
Right.
I don't know. It's like I often wonder if we didn't have all the meteors and extinction events that we had, or if we didn't have at least one or certain ones, it would have totally changed a lot of things. But
Yeah.
like a lot of things might have still developed, right? But I'm always curious if like insect brains would have the ability to have consciousness or arthropod brains in the same way. And
Dude,
I don't know.
my brain does this all the time where I start to think about like, what if that asteroid never came and like dinosaurs still ruled the world. How, like, so
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, what you're getting at is, these devastating events lead to a further evolved species, even if it's not the species that was here before the mass extinction.
Well, evolution's going to happen regardless, but with what you mean is like sophistication, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, well, it's like with beetles. Beetles are incredibly speciose, perhaps not including predatory or parasitic wasps. They might be the most speciose. There's a little bit of a fight there, and what you consider a species or whatever. But
Okay.
beetles are some of the one of the longest running like lineages of animals, and so it's kind of like, well, for one thing, not dying in an extinction event or not having like a massive proportion of beetles dying in an extinction event is great for like evolutionary congruence, right? Over time, you just build up and build up and build up.
Right.
But like anything, we talked about it last time, nature abhors a vacuum, like you said, right? And nature also abhors uh, things that do too well. And so, like early plants mined phosphorus out of rocks, and they produced oxygen. They made the oceans hypoxic and made the atmosphere more hyperoxic, and that caused an extinction event in the ocean. So, but we think of plants as like these benign creatures. They compete and they kill, and they definitely like, they're not
The
as
original gangsters, man.
yeah, seriously. Maybe
Okay,
microbes are the original gangsters,
dude,
but
we got deep into this rabbit hole. Let's climb back
yeah,
out.
we need to back
Let,
out.
let's climb back out. So this I know you'll know a lot about. Bringing in cereal aphids may actually offset. So cereal aphids are the aphids that you would use as a food source that would live on the cereal banker plants. Bringing these cereal aphids in can actually offset some ecological events that would negatively impact the use of future biological control agents. And
And why is that?
go ahead. I was going to leave that to you.
Oh, I see. Can you repeat the sentence? I want to make sure I got everything.
No worries. Bringing cereal aphids into your garden may actually offset some ecological events that will influence future biological applications negatively.
Yeah. Okay. So this is true. At least it can be true. It's
Right.
not always true. Everything's contextual, right? But yes, definitely. And here's why. So I don't know if BioBest or whoever you talk to, or even in your own research, if you have points that I don't make here, I'm curious to hear them. But basically, um, you kind of mentioned it with the aureus earlier, right? So like, if you have an already adapted population in the area, then you're possibly going to introduce some intra-guild, is that? Yeah, interguild interference, essentially. So you'll have different organisms, like hoverflies, for example, um, or like so their larvae are predatory. I recently put a video up on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol, about the American hoverfly and its casting behavior and that sort of a thing. So they're very voracious on many aphids. They're usually aphid generalists, the ones that eat aphids anyways. Um, and so if you establish this like foreign organism, then they might outcompete with other natives. They might get out of control in that way. So you can have an ecological sort of snowball effect occur, and that can be problematic, especially if you don't really know what's going on. Now, from a cultivation perspective, for the same reasons why um, the aphids kind of having a 1-to-1 kill ratio sort of makes them a little bit inefficient. This also means that you might have to have quite a big operation for that to have a substantial effect. But as we know with many organisms, you don't always need a substantial amount for them to establish. Or you can have many, many people establishing a small amount in many locations, right? It's not just you, it's the entire ecosystem. your local area, California as a state, the United States as a or the North American continent, right? Yeah.
Definitely. I've seen some of your most interesting videos would be about, or at least mention the potential for American thrips, American greenhouse thrips to be to cross over into Canada. But Canada is so biological, but they're so biologically control oriented that they don't,
Hmm.
they haven't seen the same kind of thrip problem that we have down here.
And it's a little bit different from like a geographic sort of biogeographic framework, right? A little bit
Right,
colder.
right. Okay,
Um,
it's like a human influence.
it's a global influence. It's like a weather pattern thing too. But
Ah,
but you're right. Like thrips are, well, Western flower thrips in particular are really great at living at lower temperatures, but they grow slower and it takes a longer time. So it's not great for them. So Canada and the northern latitudes have that going for them,
oh, I see. I see.
but
Okay.
I'm positive that what you're saying is also true. That like a highly sort of fastidious agency, Australia, New Zealand, also great examples of very, very like pest averse organizations. They're really killing it, in my opinion, when it comes to making sure that new things don't come in because their ecosystems are very delicate and fragile. And some of their thrips actually have come to other sort of plants that have dispersed millions of years ago to like Hawaii and through the horticultural trade to like California in specific, like
Hmm.
Myoporum thrips, which are native to uh, Tanzania, Tasmania, the Tasmanian island.
Okay.
Um, which is funny because actually the plants that they feed on are not in their native territory. They don't really feed on them that much. But the thought is that they made a host switch
Uh-huh.
because they were transferred with such plants, and they had to either eat that or eat nothing. So they adapted, and so now the populations that exist in North America feed on those plants. And if those populations get back to the Tasmanian island, then they would wreak havoc. So it's funny how that can happen.
That is that is something that I've never even thought about. My understanding when you said that was that they were just more on top of their BCAs, but it makes sense that they're just less inclined to be up there.
Hmm.
I gotcha.
But
So,
but I'm sure there's all kinds of effects. But what were you gonna say?
um, the most, I would say the biggest reason I didn't want to, that I decided to go against an Aphidius banker plant system was not being able to use knockdown sprays if I get an outbreak of something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to say that if because look, man, when this many thrips come through the area, I don't care what kind of biological control agents you have, they're gonna be on them, and so you have to be able to do knockdown sprays. That's my opinion, and in my particular circumstance. So
Which, by the way, do you mind sharing what that circumstance is for people who also have
sure.
it?
I'm in Northern California. I grow in an open to the air hoop house most of the year. Winter, I close it up with some clear plastic. But so this is totally off grid. I have no power from the power company. I create my own power with a diesel generator, and that's my story. But so I'm very susceptible to when things like the oak pollen falls from the oak, nearby oaks, or the pine pollen, and thrips follow it on into my plants. And so when I
Definitely.
say tens of thousands of thrips land on your plants, there's nothing you can do but spray. That's because I got oak trees all over the place.
Sure, right? Yeah, it's like and that yeah, it's my experience is similar. Outdoor environments are, for obvious reasons, more difficult to deal with.
Yeah. But that for me was the biggest reason not to do it. And then, of course, you're depending on the if you're depending on the effectiveness of these biological control agents, and if all of these factors are true, then you really can't depend on them throughout the season. It's sort of like, it would be sort of like a project of passion, you know, as a side project, and you'd have to pull your banker plants out of your greenhouse every time you sprayed, and you'd have to cover them. The banker plants need to be covered to prevent the wasps from flying away. If anybody's interested in getting the article about this Aphidius banker plant system, you can DM me. I can send it to you. It's really cool. I'd love to see somebody do it, but I don't think I'm going to end up doing it. It doesn't seem like it's going to work out.
Totally makes sense. I have used a similar sort of system. I call it the quarantine system. That's basically what you're talking about, and it does derive. Well, it's a similar thing. It derives from like the inoculative and inundative releases of like entomologist researchers who would do this sort of a thing in like the agricultural situations, and it basically involves like using a mesh screen of some kind of tent or a cage or something.
I saw hair
And
nets. I bought 150 hair nets. If anybody wants them, I'll send them to you for price of shipping.
there you go. All right. But so this was actually with diglyphus. This was for the leaf miner. And what I ended up doing was I found what the perfect mesh, for me anyways, what the perfect mesh screening would be for these cages, so that the adult leaf miner fly is bigger than the parasitoid wasp. So, and the female wasps are bigger than the males. So I was able to do it so that the adults couldn't get out, but the females could passively leave the cage.
Oh, dude, that is so cool.
Right, yeah, and so you
I wish I had
could
a heart
basically,
button I could press and fly up a heart on that. That's a really cool thing.
yeah, I liked it quite a bit, and I mean, this was like in the field, and I don't have any sort of empirical data about it, unfortunately. I really wish that somebody would run away with this kind of a thing. Maybe it's already in existence. I would imagine that that's probably the case somewhere, at least if it's only in a researcher's like laboratory. But actually, you're cutting out a little bit on my end. I don't know if that's me or you. Hmm. Oh, ATGAcres left. That's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. I wonder if I end it here, will it save? Perhaps. Hmm. It's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to end it right here and see if I can save it.